person. I'll be speaking to you about the what we call vasculo-metabolic effects of glucose-lowering therapies. We all realize that diabetes is a vascular disease. I remember that one of the institutions where I work, once a cardiologist threatened to abolish Department of Diabetology, saying that it should be part of cardiology. And he probably had some sense there. And this is what we presently appreciate, that diabetes is a vascular disease, and whatever treatment modalities we use, they should be vascular friendly. These are my declaration of conflict of interest. Now, this is a very important hypothesis which has been going around for the last 50 years or more, let me tell you, because some of you probably not seen literature at that time, you weren't born probably. But remember that diabetes and some of the vascular disease may have a common origin. So there may be those multiple genes which make you prone to both these diseases, so that we always think that diabetes causes vascular disease, but it may be also inherited independently. And this hypothesis is on a lot of evidence. It cannot be very direct evidence for this until we go into a little more genetics and find some common genetic genes which really cause both of these problems, diabetes as well as vascular disease. Now, the type of vascular disease in diabetes here is a global evidence, and you'll find that prevalence in type 2 diabetes is very, very, very marked, For example, atherosclerosis, cardiovascular disease, 1 in 3% in diabetes, 1 in 3, or certainly 1 in 5. Heart failure is now gaining prominence in diabetology. See, many admissions with cardiac problems are now for heart failure, and not as many as earlier were for the coronary artery disease, was the predominant reason for admission. Now heart failure is getting more and more frequent. And of course, myocardial infarct and stroke is the cause. Now, whenever we address this issue of cardiovascular disease, we have certain treatments which are supposed to modify cardiovascular disease and mitigate it. However, after applying all these therapies like smoking cessation, a meticulous control of blood pressure, meticulous control of lipids, increasing physical activity, using platelet inhibitors or antithrombotic, after doing all that, we still have some residual mortality left, and that some or other has to be addressed. And sometimes when we discover that some of the other compounds, for example, anti-diabetics, may address a part of this issue of residual mortality, it does become very exciting for us to see these molecules in great detail and with great interest. So here is a typical prototype patient in India, type 2 diabetic, 52-year-old male. You see, diabetic for 3 years, also hypertensive. Often there are comorbidity all the time. You see, and there is history of coronary artery disease in father at 58 years age. Moderately obese, see, controlled blood pressure now on metformin, telmisartan, amlodipine, and atorvastatin. And when you work up, you see that A1C is 7.8. And of course, the fasting postprandial are high. Creatinine is normal, so A and eGFR is normal. The urinary albumin excretion is more already. So it shows that there may be some kidney involvement as well. And lipids, of course, a control LDL cholesterol is at goal at least 96. Should be really 70. The target is 70. See, and of course there is a possibility that there is coronary artery disease because the treadmill test is positive, and angiography shows a 50% stenosis of left main. So this is a very typical example of a type 2 diabetic. This 3-year duration is rather short, but still you know that this disease may be undiagnosed for 3 to 5 years on an average. Type 2 diabetes remains undiagnosed after the onset. So here is a person with already cardiovascular problem. So what should be your priorities of treatment? And one is to achieve metabolic control, of course, and main thing is to prevent complications. So treating diabetes is not control of glycemia now. More important really is to prevent the complications, and of which cardiovascular complications are the main ones. And of course, in giving them good quality of life. So achievement of metabolic control, if you look at, that you are looking at SGLT2 inhibitors, and primarily we're focusing on EMPA. And here is a comparison of empagliflozin and sitagliptin when added to metformin. Because we always have this question that after metformin failure, what should be the next therapeutic agent employed? And there is always a competition between a SGLT2 inhibitor and a DPP4 inhibitor. See, and this sort of data give you some insight into what you should select between these two on top of metformin failure. And here you see 90 weeks of follow-up, and you see the A1C reduction here, and you will find that empagliflozin gives you a better A1C reduction, and it is sustained for 90 weeks. And of course now this period has been extended so that the sustainability of response with gliflozins is very good. And of course with sitagliptin, it is much better as far as the glycemic control is concerned. So again, glycemic control, whatever is the baseline A1C, there is good reduction. And you must know very well that the starting point is high A1C, then obviously the lowering is more. So this, when you look at any study with A1C lowering, see where they started from, and here is data showing wherever you start from 8, 9 or 10 A1C, you get a good reduction. And above 1% is good reduction of A1C. And of course, this is sustained, and this is sustained over 4 years. So this is very important, because we learned some time ago that sulfonylureas may not sustain the response very long, and of course, metformin may not also, and pioglitazone probably slightly better. So sustained response is a quality of these newer groups of drugs, which also partly applies to DPP4 inhibitors as well as SGLT2 inhibitors. Comparison with the sulfonylurea, which is often considered as an add-on to metformin, is here it is, you see. And of course, what you see here is the risk of hypoglycemia. Obviously, as expected, risk of hypoglycemia will be very high with glimepiride. And glimepiride, of course, is sulfonylurea, which is long-acting. And to my mind, the commonest cause of oral agent producing hypoglycemia now is this particular agent, that is glimepiride. Smaller doses of glycoside given the divided doses is probably a better option to my mind for day-to-day therapy. And again, you see here weight loss, of course. You see with sulfonylurea, don't expect weight loss. And of course, you saw if it empagliflozin, a sustained weight loss of about 3 to 4 kg. And sustained weight loss of even this magnitude does confirm some cardiovascular benefits, because whatever therapies we use, obesity, frankly, relapses are the main problem in obesity. So sustained reduction of 3-4 kilos also is substantial for clinical benefits. Again, compared to glimepiride, against blood pressure reduction, which also is an effect of SGLT2 inhibitors, nocturnal uncontrolled hypertension, it may help you to some extent, because it causes natriuresis and helps you controlling blood pressure a bit better. And of course, you see, same nocturnal uncontrolled hypertension, mainly early morning hypertension, that this study shows that use of gliflozin together with antihypertensives gives you a better handle over this morning surge of blood pressure. So this was about the metabolic control, and you saw superiority of SGLT2 inhibitors, and we saw data on the empagliflozin. The prevention of complication is the main thrust of our goals now. And we have singularly been disappointed in UKPDS, ACCORD, Advanced VADT, all studies, that it is really difficult to reduce the macrovascular disease. The microvascular, sometimes you see the benefits, you saw benefits in UKPDS. Of course, if you type 1, of course, we saw in DCCT as well. But you see the macrovascular disease and mortality, there is no reduction seen by use of the older agents in all these 4 studies which we keep quoting all the time. So we were quite disappointed that we could not change. But with SGLT2 coming in use, you see the whole scene has changed now. And another group of compounds which have changed this scene are the GLP-RAs like liraglutide or dulaglutide, semaglutide. So this slide shows you comparison of these, and the cardiovascular outcome MACE is shown there, and heart failure outcomes. These two may be different. The MACE outcomes are very well seen in empagliflozin, but not so well in the dapagliflozin. To some extent, they were seen in canagliflozin as well. See, but The heart failure outcome, again, you see there is good benefit by the gliflozin, as you see, all three of them, but the GLP-RAs, which confirm very good benefit regarding cardiovascular outcomes, do not help in heart failure outcome. So now you can choose your therapy very wisely, because you know where these drugs help in preventing or benefiting in cardiovascular outcomes. Mortality is most important. Ultimate prevention is not only reducing cardiovascular, real hard end point in any clinical study is mortality, because it's incontrovertible. So reduction in mortality is always viewed as a very important thing. The empagliflozin came out very well in EMPA-REG study as reducing not only cardiovascular mortality, but also all-cause mortality. See, the other gliflozin tended to show benefits in cardiovascular, sometimes the 3-point MACE, and of course in heart failure very well, but mortality reduction was not so prominent. Gliflozin started emerging in some of the data, but it was not as obvious as it was in empagliflozin. So mortality is a very important issue, and empagliflozin has come out very well. Now, whether this is seen because of different design of the studies, mainly I must tell you that the patients recruited for these very important landmark studies on SGLT2 inhibitors, that is EMPA-REG study, liraglutide study, of course, for the GLP-RA, or in the SGLT2 inhibitors, you see EMPA study and CANVAS study and DECLARE, you see all these three. Remember that the patients recruited were different. And I have a feeling that sometimes the outcome that you saw may have been different, because that, I think, to my mind, does make a lot of difference what you'll see in the next 2-3 years of follow-up. Now, what is the mechanism by which, what SGLT2 confirm this cardiovascular benefit? And towards this goal, there have been these studies where the myocardial structure and function was studied. Because whatever benefits you see, until you show some mechanism by which it is produced, it doesn't form part of hardcore science. See, even if you see some phenomenon, you have to truly explain why it occurred. And to that extent, some of the mechanistic studies are important. And here is a study directly on the myocardial remodeling. And this small study, where a small number of patients where the heart muscle was studied and muscle mass was studied, left ventricular hypertrophy and mass was studied carefully, it was shown that empagliflozin reduced the left ventricular mass index. So this is important. So it has effect on remodeling, and that may be the mechanism by which it produces cardiovascular benefits. So again, you see left ventricular mass index reduced in this EMPA heart study. Then, so clinical implications of EMPA heart studies are very important. See, that you see you can reduce really the left ventricular hypertrophy and modify this modeling effect that we see with cardiovascular disease, with coronary artery disease. So I think, of course, you are familiar with this relative risk reduction you see with the empagliflozin in EMPA-REG study, and you see risk reduction of cardiovascular death, and also remember all-cause death, which is also very interesting. And you see, and of course the other benefits which are common to other gliflozin, you see here hospitalization for heart failure and worsening nephropathy. I must tell you that magnitude of protection of kidney and heart failure is really very large with the gliflozins. It is 35 to 40% with all these SGLT2 inhibitors. And of course, it is very important therapeutically to use these agents wherever you think that a person is at risk of these problems. You see, now EMPA-REG outcome, you see all-cause death also modified. So I think we'll go on little quickly. See, risk reduction of cardiovascular death, which we discussed, see. And established cardiovascular disease, if you take and compare the patients in different studies, you will find that EMPA-REG study, you see, showed benefits in coronary artery disease, peripheral artery disease, and everywhere. So all over it showed cardiovascular benefits. See, so type of cardiovascular death rates in different types of CVD. So it's not only in coronary artery disease, all forms of cardiovascular disease, it showed improvement in the mortality. Think again showing, you see, the 3-point MACE and mortality outcomes comparison of EMPA versus DAPA and CANA, and you see here mainly the mortality benefits were seen with EMPA, and of course the other benefits are seen with the other agents as well. With DAPA, of course, you could not see the primary MACE outcome benefits. So these are some subtle differences, and the reasons for this, of course, can be very, very difficult, but they are a matter of discussion. Hospitalization for heart failure, there is a benefit with almost all the SGLT2 inhibitors, and this is to the extent of 30 to 40%. So it is very, very important because the magnitude is so high that it is almost incontrovertible that this benefit truly, it is indeed real. Kidney outcomes as well is 30 to 45%. So I think sustaining quality of life is very important. Very quickly, I must tell you that now the guidelines tell that if a patient with type 2 diabetes has history of heart failure or chronic kidney disease, it has to be SGLT2 inhibitor, and ASCVD, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, then it can be SGLT2 inhibitors or GLP-RA. This is what the guidelines say. So choosing therapy now is dependent upon the vascular status. And I have one very interesting thing to add here for you, for clinical practice. Type 2 diabetes of more than 10 years duration, even if there is no clinical evidence of cardiovascular disease, there is a likelihood of occult cardiovascular disease in these people to the great extent. Diabetes, type 2 diabetes as being a cardiovascular risk equivalent ab initio, right initially is not accepted now. But with 10 years of follow-up in one very interesting study by Kaiser Permanente group in California, where 1.5 million diabetics versus non-diabetics were followed, the risk factors started emerging with type 2 diabetes of 10 years duration. So anything like that, this situation like this, you have to consider treatment with SGLT2 inhibitors, and EMPA has come out much better than the other glipizins in this regard. So I think I'll pass on very rapidly now. So what we do really appropriate clinical use for maximum benefit, I think, in the situations where we must consider SGLT2 therapy you've seen. Where you should avoid, of course, is very severe kidney disease, where eGFR is less than 15. There you are not supposed to exhibit SGLT2 inhibitors, and with volume depletion, urinary tract infection, these are situations where you avoid. So anybody ketosis prone, obviously no. Type 1 diabetes, presently no, although very careful studies have shown some benefits. So I think these, to summarize, I think in atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease and with history of heart failure or factors which make a patient prone to heart failure, it is very, very important indeed to exhibit SGLT2 inhibitors as a very important component of your therapy. Thank you very much for your patient help.
Thank you, Dr. Chandalia. Dr. Chandalia has very beautifully brought out the importance